Hi everyone, welcome back. This is, believe it or not, Module 5. So today we're going to be talking about cerebral palsy. So we're just going to go ahead and get into it. So cerebral palsy is a diagnosis that you probably might not know by name, but if you saw somebody with cerebral palsy, you would be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's very common, especially in pediatrics. It's something that we treat a lot in OT. And what it truly is it's a group of disorders that affect a person's ability to move and maintain balance and posture. So, falling under the category of movement disorders, but it is the most common motor disorder, motor meaning movement, among children. So, if we look at this little graphic here, and we think about our root words, cerebral refers to the cerebrum, which is the area in the brain that's affected by cerebral palsy. And then palsy refers to the brain's injury, which kind of palsy in quotes means weakness or problems using muscles. So if you think about a palsy, like a facial palsy, anything like that, it's kind of like some form of paralysis where the muscles are not working the way that they're supposed to be. So if you combine the two, cerebral and palsy, it's some type of weakness or problems in the brain, which affects then the motor function of the body. So it can range from mild to severe, mild, moderate to severe. A person with mild CP might be able to walk, but it's a little bit awkward. They might not need any special help. It looks a little bit not what we would call quote unquote normal. But however, a person with severe cerebral palsy might use special equipment like a walker or a wheelchair to be able to walk, or honestly, they might not ever be able to walk at all. It might need lifelong one-on-one care. So it's something that, again, you've probably seen in your day-to-day life, but you didn't know that it was CP because it looks so different for everyone and from the pediatric standpoint to the adult or geriatric standpoint. So, over the course of one's life, CP does not change in severity over time. So, if you're diagnosed with mild CP, that doesn't mean that as you get older, it's going to become severe. You're always going to have mild CP, but the symptoms can change over the course of a person's life. So, the symptoms can become more difficult or challenging for them to be able to do things throughout the day, but that doesn't change the level of severity of their diagnosis. So in the next slide, we're going to kind of talk about the different types of CP. So each of these we're going to break down more in the coming slides, but I just wanted to give a quick little overview of what they are and what area of the brain they affect. So there's 3 types of cerebral palsy: spastic, dyskinetic, and ataxic. That's how you say them. And so as you can see by this little graph, 70 to 80% of people with cerebral palsy have spastic CP. It is the most common form of CP, and it's characterized by stiff and tight muscles, and it affects the motor cortex of the brain. So if you think about motor meaning movement, that makes sense that their muscles are going to be tight and stiff because it's harder for them to move them if it's affecting the motor cortex in the brain. So then if we move to dyskinetic CP over here on the right, it's characterized by involuntary or jerky movements. So that's like the movements, if you think about like when you're sleeping and you kind of jerk yourself, that's kind of the movements that we're talking about. They're not intentional. You're not doing them on your own. They're just happening because your brain's sending those signals. And they kind of can be a little bit jerky. So if you think about somebody with this type of CP, when they're going to, reach for something or complete a task, it's not going to be like one fluid motion like it would be for a typically developing child. It's going to look a little bit different. They're probably going to miss things. It's going to be a little bit more jerky, like moving around. And the reason for this is because It comes from a damage to the basal ganglia in the brain, which, if you don't know what the basal ganglia is, that's totally fine, but it's the area that affects our coordination. So, on a day-to-day basis, other than, when we think coordination, we think, oh, that kid's not coordinated, they can't kick the ball or whatever. But really, we use our coordination every single day. It's, oh, my cup's right here, let me reach for the cup and grab it, and I have to be coordinated in that movement to make it successful. So it can make things like that on a daily basis pretty hard. And the third type of CP is ataxic CP. So they're characterized by shaky movements. Again, they're not fluid movements. They're a little bit more shaky or jerky. It affects balance and sense of positioning in space. So these kids or adults don't really understand where their body is in space. Their balance is not the best. If they are able to walk, they're probably bumping into things, tripping over things, things like that. Just because they don't have the best sense of balance in where their body is in space. And this arises from the cerebellum, which is kind of like our balance center in our brain. So those are the three specific types of CP, but there are, as you can see, our percentages don't completely add up to 100. So the other percentages that we're missing are the mixed types of CP. So that can be things like, you have spastic dyskinetic CP, or you have dyskinetic ataxic CP. So you kind of have a combination of all those symptoms, but that's a little bit more unique than the three common types of CP. So we're going to get into each one in the next coming slides. Okay, so we are going to talk about spastic cerebral palsy. It is the most common type of CP and affects about 80% of the CP population. So this type of CP has increased muscle tone, which means basically that their muscles are stiff, and because of this, their movements can be awkward and kind of jerky. But when we talk about muscle tone, we mean if I were to tell you to play dead, you would kind of go limp. That is decreased muscle tone, but increased muscle tone is if you were to flex all your muscles really, really hard and really strong, and I tried to bend your arm while you're resisting me, that's increased muscle tone. But this type of CP, they're not doing it intentionally, it's involuntarily. So even if you were to go move their arm or their leg or something like that, it's going to feel like they're resisting you, but it's not intentional. That's just how their muscles are constantly contracted. Maybe you've seen a wrist that's contracted, or it's contracted inward and elbows bent, something like that, and it's just really stiff. So when we talk about this type of CP, it's typically categorized by what part of the body it affects. So we have the term, all these terms end in either plegia or paresis. Plegia means complete paralysis, and paresis means semi-paralysis, loss of movement or something like that. So the first one we're going to talk about is spastic diplegia or diparesis. It's mainly in the legs with less or no impact in the arms. So if you look at this little graph over here, the first one on the left is diplegia. So it's typically just the legs are affected. And then the less affected areas are in orange, which is the upper body and arms. Then if we move to spastic hemiplegia and hemiparesis, hemi meaning half, it only affects one side of the body. So it's typically an arm and a leg are affected on the same side. As you can see in the middle diagram, the arm and the leg are affected and the torso is not really affected. And then lastly, spastic quadriplegia or quadriparesis is the most severe kind that affects all four limbs, the trunk and the face. So the trunk's not as affected as all four limbs, but it's still affected in some way. Usually with this type of CP, it also includes some type of developmental disability, potentially epilepsy or problems with hearing, vision, or speech. So it's not just the paralysis or, the muscle tone issue, but also there's a lot of associated issues as well. So we're going to move on to dyskinetic CP. With this type of CP, people often have difficulty controlling the movements of their hands, their arms, their feet, and their legs, which often makes it difficult, as you can imagine, to sit or walk. So typically movements alternate between slow and then super rapid and quick and jerky. So it can look kind of awkward when they are walking or moving around. And the face and tongue can also be affected in some of the cases, making speech and swallowing difficult. So it can be hard for them to communicate. They might have an alternative communication device. It can be hard for them to eat and swallow. So some of them might not eat orally the way that you or I might. They might have a G tube, which is kind of just like it goes in straight into your stomach, something like that. So it can kind of range from severity, as we've talked about before. And I think this is kind of an interesting fact, but a person with dyskinetic CP has muscle tone that not only changes from day to day, maybe they wake up today and it's, they're super stiff, but then tomorrow they're not super stiff. But it can also change within the day. So maybe they wake up today and they're feeling super stiff, but then in a couple hours, they're not, they don't have as strong of a muscle tone as they did when they woke up. So moving right along to ataxic cerebral palsy, this one is kind of characterized by poor balance and coordination, as we've talked about. This type of CP causes problems with balance and coordination, which causes unsteady walking patterns. So you can imagine if you have difficulty with being coordinated, your balance, walking is not going to be something that's as easy as it is for you or I. So they can also be challenging to complete movements that require you to do it quickly. And that require a lot of control, can be really hard. So when you think about this, the first thing that comes to my mind is like writing. Whether you realize it or not, writing requires a lot of muscle control, a lot of focus. You have to be kind of coordinated in your movements to make the letters look the way they're supposed to. So if it's not writing, they can also have difficulty controlling their hands when reaching for something like a ball or like throwing it. So if you think about younger kids that aren't writing, one of the things we teach little kids is, how to throw a ball and catch it. And that can be something that's actually really challenging because it does require a lot of coordination and balance to throw and catch a ball. And like we talked about earlier, mixed cerebral palsy is a smaller percentage of the types of cerebral palsy. So some people can have symptoms of more than one type of CP. So a common example of this, like we talked about earlier, would be spastic dyskinetic CP. So they have the symptoms of spastic CP and dyskinetic CP all together. So common behaviors and associated symptoms. Behavior problems occur in 1 in 4 children with CP. It's extremely common, not only with CP, but a lot of kids with diverse abilities tend to have associated behavior issues. Children with CP may also have emotional problems, such as difficulty with peers, strong emotional responses to new challenges, emotional regulation issues as a whole. So this could be them getting super upset over getting out in a game or spilling water or anything like that. That might not be super upsetting to you or I, can be extremely upsetting to a child with CP. So it's important to remember when it comes to these kids that also, when they are, acting out, quote unquote, it's not purposeful, but often it's the same thing that we've talked about in almost every module, that these kids have really big feelings and they don't know how to communicate them, that is where the emotional regulation comes in. They might be acting out, but it's more as a way to communicate to you that something's going on and not to defy the rules or anything like that. And then something I just wanted to make you guys aware of is that overall, children with CP can experience a variety of challenges, including but not limited to, this is just a brief list: mobility issues, communication issues, chronic pain, the difficulty swallowing we talked about, intellectual disabilities or learning differences, hearing or vision impairments, behavior and emotional regulation challenges, as we talked about, epilepsy, sleep issues, spinal or hip abnormalities, or bowel and bladder issues. So if we take all these into consideration, you can see where it would be hard to do the day-to-day things that they are expected to do when they have all of these things going on. So in the last slide, we talked about common behaviors, signs and symptoms of CP that affect children with CP every single day. So what can we do as counselors to help make their days a little bit easier? So one of the things that I think, no matter the diagnosis, is following an IEP or behavior plan if they have one. You'll be made aware of it ahead of time. Or we can work with leadership and parents to develop one if you feel like it's something that they need. The benefit of following through with this is not only consistency for the child, but they know what to expect. They know what they're working towards. They know what their reward is, whether it be at camp or at home. And it might even be praise or, telling parents that they had a good day at the end of the day. But it's also determined that using breaks or one-on-one attention, like what, tasks to avoid for these kinds of kids, what games that maybe are a little frustrating, for you to be aware of that to make your life easier as a counselor so that they're not having those emotional outbursts or things like that. So as we talked about, CP can make it difficult for children to participate and play the same way as their peers. So modifying games or activities to be more inclusive is a huge one. If you think about, throwing and catching a ball is really hard, but you want to play larish or dodgeball, that's kind of challenging for those kids with CP. So maybe, playing a different game where they're kicking something or, depending on the ability of the child that you have, you're using a bigger ball, like maybe like a yoga ball or a kickball that's bigger so it's easier for them to grasp. Things like that. If you ever have any, questions about that, feel free to ask leadership as well. Another one is setting clear expectations, behavior, or rewards. This is just kind of like reminding them if they do have behavior plans, hey, like remember we want to get all of our stickers on here today, or whatever it may be. Just reminding them like, hey, I am watching, I'm here, like I'm proud of you for doing good. This is what I want you to do today. Those first then statements are really helpful. And then lastly, encouraging them to communicate. We talked about how, communication is hard, and sometimes behavior is the form of communication that kids tend to use. They might act out, but really they're just trying to tell you something. So if you encourage them like, hey, I see that you're frustrated, like what's going on? Let's talk about it. Or like, let me know if this starts happening, da 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 da. It kind of opens that gateway of communication for them to be able to talk to you about what's going on, and that can only set them and you up for success in the future. So that is all that I have for this week. Thank you for watching. I hope that this is helpful. I know that we have a few kids with CP, so hopefully this is something that you can incorporate into your day-to-day as a counselor, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Feel free to reach out to me with comments or questions, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.